Thank you, everyone. So you see my name on the screen. I'm excited to be here today. I just want to give a shout out to ULI for leading this process and Cousins Properties for hosting us. So I will be sharing a summary of LEED v5 with a focus on embodied carbon. I'll highlight some of the actions to decarbonize the building industry with what we know today. I'm also going to share some highlights from a recent report from Rocky Mountain Institute, RMI, and USGBC around embodied carbon in buildings. So we're only going to scratch the surface today. There's a great deal of rich content and information that's still coming. Full disclosure, LEED v5 will officially be released late spring 2025. So some of the details are still being voted on and ratified. I'm going to share a little bit about the process and how that works. So we're around 31 years old, and we've been a leader in transforming buildings and communities for a healthier, more sustainable future. We created LEED, the world's first green building rating system, setting the standard for high-performance, efficient spaces. LEED v5 builds on this legacy with a strong focus on decarbonization. In addition to that, we also offer a suite of programs, resources, and credentials that empower industry professionals to design, construct, and operate buildings that minimize environmental impact and prioritize occupant well-being. We're helping drive the building industry towards a more sustainable future, one LEED project at a time. I'll begin by sharing some updates around LEED v5. First, a quick visual to show you the evolution of LEED. I was happy to hear we have a national volunteer that serves on one of our LEED technical advisory groups. And so these LEED is not made in a back room somewhere without any transparency. You can kind of get an idea of how it evolves and how it's designed. We like to say that it's built by the market for the market. We set out to complete this work with the goal you'll see on the screen so that we can provide actionable, ambitious solutions for projects using LEED. In the earliest days of LEED, USGBC took the ambiguous term of green buildings and created a definition and organized framework. And it's our charge today to do the same with LEED v5. To focus our work on solutions to the issues we're seeing in our industry, we set out with 3 key impact areas where LEED v5 can and must address these challenges by providing clear and actionable solutions to projects. Decarbonization will account for 50%. So that is a big deal. This is kind of a new format for LEED moving forward. And you can see the other 2 key areas, quality of life, accounting for 25%, and ecological conservation and restoration, 25%. So I'm going to show you just a definition of what these 3 areas are focused on. Human-centric strategies to improve health, well-being, and this includes equity and inclusion for building occupants. Strategies and actions that can be implemented at the individual asset level to limit environmental degradation and contribute towards the restoration of ecosystems. And then lastly, decarbonization will drive the industry towards a decarbonized built environment across all major sources of emissions, operational, embodied, and transportation. Building design and construction, or BD and C versions of the rating systems, will drive buildings that are decarbonized, humane, and biodiverse with the goal of near zero by 2050. Many of the strategies from previous versions of LEED have become industry practice. So many credits have been combined, and new elements like pilot credits have been integrated to reflect evolutions in building design and construction practices and to address some of the most important current challenges. The Operations and Maintenance Rating System, or O&M, aimed for market transformation in the broadest building stock, the existing ones. LEED v5 O&M provides education and leadership and establishes an actionable roadmap for improved performance over time. The O&M rating system continues to be grounded in measured building performance and recognizes existing buildings that are starting down a path towards decarbonization through long-term and immediate steps. We're seeing a tremendous focus on decarbonization throughout our industry, and you will see that clearly represented in V5. Regarding decarbonization for existing buildings, as we all know, the challenge of decarbonizing the existing building stock is much more challenging and complex than building new decarbonized assets. For the existing assets, we are putting a huge emphasis on the need for decarbonization planning. From there, we will reward points for creating long-term pathways towards decarbonization and committing to a 5-year capital plan that will begin moving the projects in the right direction. We know that carbon can be a relatively new metric for most projects and that it's complicated. V5 will help projects visualize these impacts through assessments and visualization tools. So we're going to dig into that on the next slide here. Next 2 slides. All projects will be required to conduct a set of carbon assessments and submit the associated data at the prerequisite level. Through these assessments, LEED V5 aims to help project teams understand their sources of emissions and assess how they will change over time. From these carbon projections and assessments, which all new projects will have, LEED V5 will create a 25-year carbon assessment for all projects showing the relative impacts over time. Altogether, the new V5 works to provide solutions for today's issues and encourages market development towards decarbonization through credits across several categories. While these assessments are critical to increasing carbon literacy in the industry, we are of course ultimately working to drive action. You can see some examples of prereqs and credits that fall into each of these areas. I'm not going to go through each one, but I wanted to highlight a few credits to help provide some context as you dive into more of the requirements of the rating system. We're also acutely aware that as emissions from operations decline, embodied carbon will become a larger piece of a shrinking pie. These 2 realities are very strongly reflected in V5. So just lastly, these are kind of some new updates for LEED V5 that maybe are not carbon related, but the first one is I want to highlight is moving to a 5-year development cycle. That's something that the market has asked for, and that market needs that consistency, so we will roll out new versions of LEED every 5 years. And then that last point there, for those who work in LEED, we do have a strategic evolution of the user experience with a new dynamic digital interface, as well as tools and resources for projects and evolved rating systems. So much more user-friendly, digital-based system. So why embodied carbon? Embodied carbon represents the millions of tons of earth-warming carbon emissions released during the life cycle of building materials, including the extraction, manufacturing, transportation, construction, and disposal. Concrete foundations, steel framing, glass facades, building insulation, interiors are all examples of materials that contribute to embodied carbon emission in a climate crisis. We are at an inflection point on embodied carbon. As our understanding of embodied carbon grows, so has the urgency to reduce all carbon emissions. 40 years ago, projects were learning how to improve energy efficiency by 20 and 30%. However, zero carbon was an impossible dream. Now, carbon neutral buildings are on the horizon for all buildings, and we have to go down the same road for embodied carbon, only this time we don't have as much time to do it. We don't have 40 years to figure it out. So despite being early on the learning curve, projects can make significant reductions now. We have to accelerate embodied carbon learning curve to advance our knowledge beyond the easy reductions. We have to uncover further decarbonization strategies and turn buildings into climate solutions with carbon storing materials. So the previous graph is from the RMI USGBC report called Driving Action on Embedded Carbon in Buildings. It distills the science around embodied carbon. Providing a synthesis of the latest understanding of embodied carbon, the report strives to answer key questions that may be stunning progress in blocking much needed action to reduce embodied emissions. The key takeaways and actions suggested in this report can help pave a path for designers, builders, and policymakers to transform our building practices to become climate positive. So, for the report, researchers identified key questions that needed answering in the embodied carbon front. For example, how big an opportunity is embodied carbon? I'm going to show the answer, but it was mentioned earlier on someone's slide. If anybody saw this, does anybody know the answer? Okay. The current estimate is that embodied carbon from building materials account for approximately 11% of global energy-related GHG emissions. So that's 11% of global emissions. Upfront embodied carbon emissions from building construction in the U.S. is estimated to be 370 million tons annually, or 6% of total U.S. GHG emissions. That's equal to the whole state of California's current emissions. So which should we prioritize, operational or embodied? We need to tackle both. High emissions in either category or both result in a high total. Only by minimizing both can we achieve truly low emissions buildings. Within the building industry, operational carbon has had a head start, but we've learned a lot through this process by understanding such as how to measure and establishing baselines, things like that. So we have to do the same with embodied carbon. What should we prioritize to reduce embodied carbon today? Here are the top design interventions for embodied carbon reduction. To lower embodied carbon, we must prioritize material use, which is the biggest opportunity. We have to right-size buildings so we don't overbuild while minimizing the need for new production. This reduces upfront emissions tied to construction. We need to specify low-carbon materials like bio-based options and design for disassembly. These strategies ensure both immediate and long-term carbon reduction. So this is, some of what I'm presenting today I think is part of the business case for low embodied materials, and that's a challenge that you might come across with developers. So this is one we get in our world. So the answer is it depends. The study shows that cost varies a lot, but there's not a direct correlation in embodied carbon and cost, but more of a correlation with more material use. More materials equals more cost. Reducing embodied carbon is not necessarily expensive. We can achieve significant reductions up to 30% with readily available materials and even potential cost savings. I think some of this has been highlighted earlier today. While deeper cuts might have a slight cost premium today, the market is evolving. More low embodied carbon options are becoming available, driving down cost and making sustainable choices more accessible. So 3 case studies. These slides showcase 3 projects involving embodied carbon reduction that doesn't have to break the bank. They achieve 20 to 46% embodied carbon cuts through smart design and material choice, like optimized structures and concrete mixes, all at no added cost. These real-world examples demonstrate that sustainable building is both possible and affordable today. There's also, if you wanted to Google this, there's a free online course on this, and then you can download the report itself. Here are some conclusions from the report. There are lots of low-hanging fruit, so everyone needs to pick the fruit now. We don't have 40 years to go from low-hanging fruit to zero. We have to do it now. There's no denying, here's another one, sorry. I'll pause between my points here. There's no denying embodied carbon anymore. Design teams need to become literate in embodied carbon. There's no silver bullet. Addressing concrete alone won't get us there, nor will wood or steel. We have to decarbonize all of the above. It's not just one thing. We can't ignore renovations and retrofits anymore. And also standardization is needed. And good news is that it's happening. There's a coalition called Embodied Carbon Harmonization and Optimization, ECHO project, which aims to standardize the reporting of embodied carbon across the building industry. ULI and USGBC are partners in this. That concludes my presentation. You can scan this slide. You can go to usgbc.org/LEED-V5 or just usgbc.org. You can Google LEED-V5. Maybe there'll be a link in the follow-up email. There's lots of ways to figure this out. We hope that you'll research more. We'd love to be your partner moving forward, and I'm glad to be here today. Just one more plug for our organization. We are a membership-based organization. So if your company or you as an individual want to join or at least learn about benefits, I encourage you to go to our website and see what we offer. That's it for me. Thank you.